Well, Steven, I don't even know where to start. I read your book, The War of Art, in 2015, and then I went to Turning Pro, and I had this like really weird obsession with the whole idea of turning pro. And then when COVID happened, I had a podcast, I reached out to you, and I was like, he ain't gonna say nothing. Then you were like, sure, I'll come on. And since then, we've formed a good friendship, and we've gotten to know each other really well. But I wanted to say thank you for letting me come out here and see you, meet you formally, and just say for a moment, like, your books were something that really changed my mind into the way I was able to look at where I really was at and where I needed to go. And I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but those books
Not
really...
in those terms.
Yeah,
no.
but those...
No.
Yeah. So it was good. And, you know, they were really good for my life. And it was something I never got to say thank you in person for. But I'm sure there are other people out there who've read your books will think the same thing. So hell of a journey you put together.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Jeff. We're here in Southern California. And this is the first time Jeff and I have ever met. And the main thing we're here to talk about is your new book, Brittle To Unbreakable, Jeff Unbreakable Black. And so we're just going to plunge in and talk about that.
Sure, absolutely.
Kind of stuff. Let me tell everybody sort of just a little bit about where you're coming from.
Yeah, go for it.
And in fact, tell me what is the actual condition that you had where your bones would break?
So the disease is known as Osteogenesis Imperfecta, and you can think of it as osteoporosis that never goes away. So there's multiple types of it, 1 to 8, and Riker, who works with my chief of staff there as a son, he has type 8. So I was telling Sam, because Sam's seen Riker, she went over a speed bump and his back broke.
Wow.
And he could sneeze, his ribs could break. And then you have type 1 that you would never really know it, but if they fell, the rate of a fracture might be a little bit higher than yours. And I have 4, which is a mild to moderate. So, you know, I've always had this like quote unquote hidden disability, but what separates the disease and makes it harder for people with it to live a life with longevity and prosperity of being able to be free and movement-wise is when we break our bones, the bone in the spot it comes where you break does not come back as strong as if you broke it. So your body on a normal person like overcompensates, that bone's even stronger. Ours will be weaker there, so we're more prone to keep breaking and breaking. And so that's how I kind of ended up getting rods through my femurs, and you see that kind of stuff. So that's exactly what it is. It affects only 25,000 in the U.S. That's how rare it is. So
you've turned yourself into a competitive bodybuilder, a gym owner, and so the book is called Brittle To Unbreakable.
Yep.
And so let me ask you, I'll ask you a few questions here, Jeff.
No, go for it.
Tell us the first time when something broke on you when you were a kid.
So I was born with...
Were you aware of this when you were 4 years old? Tell us, how did it begin to show itself?
So I remember when I was 5, I was walking up the stairs in my parents' basement, my leg broke, and I couldn't move. And I remember being like, this is really weird. And like, you're 5 years old, and my mom...
Did you know what it was?
No, my mom, I ended up with a cast, and my mom's like, your bones are just a little different. And you know, this is 1984, 85, this is before the internet, what you needed to see. So I always knew I was a little different, but when you look in the mirror and you see your fellow friends, I was just a little bit shorter, but I was just as fast. I could do all the other things I could except for football and soccer, so I never really saw this disability. But yet, that was the first time I was kind of like, this isn't right. And then I remember playing baseball, and a ball came in, and I broke my thumb from when the ball hit too hard on my glove. I ended up finishing that game, but there were just things that I just didn't like about, I noticed I was different. But it manifested itself really, really subtly, you know, almost like a steak stalking its prey, until one day I did my big accident, and then it was lights out after that.
What was your big accident?
So you talk a lot about overcoming resistance. In my book, I talk a lot about overcoming fear and developing the skill of fearlessness. So what it was is, you know, I was a little pistol whip of a kid, you know, a little spark plug of fire. And there was this big hill in the neighborhood. And my mom had bought me a skateboard, my brittle bone disease. I couldn't leave the driveway, right? It was couldn't leave the driveway, and I'm like, whatever. So one day, the kids and I, we met on this hill, and it was like this. It was just going down. And a couple kids did it, and then it was my turn. And I was like, well, I don't know. I shouldn't be here. You know, I started having all these things like guilt. And then one kid goes, I double dog dare you. I was like, well, I'm not accepting that. You know, like, so I went down, and I got halfway down and lost control, and I jumped. I panicked. Fear took over on me. And the impact was so violent that it completely shattered my right femur in 5 places. It broke my spine forward, which they didn't find out for a few years later that happened. And it just set off a chain reaction of events from that. And that was where if you had broken it, you would have been in a cast for 12 weeks and maybe a surgery and gotten out. I ended up having to have surgeries after surgeries to keep correcting the bones because once they broke, they're soft, and then they had to put rods in them. And then there was leg differences, then they had to re-break my legs and re-rod them.
Yeah, that's
so it turned out to be stuff like that.
Harrowing part of your book. I mean, you read that stuff and it's like, oh my God, how did you survive that mentally? So, I mean, tell me a little bit about what role fear played for you, because I can relate to that myself in many ways.
Well, you know, so I go through all this stuff, you know, I'm going through the surgeries, and there was a moment that stands out to me that like changed it. And it was after, there's part of the book I talk about, I have this Lizarod machine, you can see where this leg's smaller than this one. And what it was is a halo device that, you know, you see people wear on their hands, they break their neck. So that was put down there, they put all these spokes through to hold it. And then...
and how old are you now?
I'm like 10, going on 11 this happens. So one day I go in for just a routine check, because they would, sometimes the wounds would get infected and they'd have to help me clean them. But I was using like a scalpel with my mom and cleaning off my own, because the skin would grow up the spokes. So I was doing all this, but I had to turn the knobs. It kept the leg broken. So for literally 12 weeks, my leg was in a continuously fractured state. And you know, when you're 11, 10, 11, you're not making much sense of not sleeping, because I couldn't sleep, I couldn't get comfortable. I didn't like the way people looked at me while I was out in public.
And you were in the hospital this whole time?
No, I was home.
Oh, you were home?
They only had me in the hospital for a week, and then they kicked me out, and then go home, and that was my mom's problem at that point. But they did a radical turn on me. And I remember I was like, this doesn't feel right, and they turned the knobs quicker, because it's supposed to be one click each way, and then one twist of a screw each way, and he just started cranking on it. And I felt this pressure, and I was like, man, it don't feel right. And then tried squirming and everything, and then they started on the other one, and then they broke my leg. And their response was to pile people on top of me. Yeah, it wasn't meaningful, but they were all like, whoa, what happened? So after that, they decided 4 weeks later to just be done with the surgery, because mentally I was gone. I was like, I remember I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't want anything to do with anybody. Very just out there. I healed from that surgery, and my very first step in physical therapy, the leg broke. And it broke right where they had done the radical turn. And I remember being like, holy shit. Like, my leg just broke taking a step. You know what I mean? It sunk into me. And I was like, well, how am I going to live the rest of my life like this? And that was when I started really wrestling with the fearlessness. Like, no matter what, I've got to keep trying. No matter what, I keep trying. But that was really what set it off for me, when I got tired of being a scaredy cat after that. You know, at a young age, like I said, no, this isn't the way I want to live. And I've since then just blazed this trail on the other way of not doing it by that. But it was one moment in time where I had probably like you, being a writer, you have this one moment in time, and you either go left or you go right. And if you go right, it's great. And if you go left, who knows? But I just chose to peel off and
that's
go that way.
amazing that it happened so young for you, that you had that moment, you know?
Yeah, but you know, when I wrote the book, I sat back and I couldn't help but, you know, I don't know who I am without bodybuilding. And that's a weird thing to like openly admit, because people are like, they'll see me like, we have this business, you're well known for your coaching, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know who I really am. Because I remember such a fun, carefree kid that was just like flipping birds, having fun, you know, rebel without a cause, maybe rebel with a cause. And it kind of changed that forever me. And I kind of relate to Dwayne Wade when he had to go through counseling after he retired from basketball to find who he was. I feel like that's going to kind of be me. Like, it would be like you suddenly stop writing and say, hey, I'm going to go become a glass blower.
When did you discover bodybuilding?
So I discovered that. They'd had me in the gyms and stuff. My mom was very, very, very focused on having me be able to take care of myself. Like 100% was just like, no matter what, you got to learn to pick yourself up, clean up after yourself. So she had convinced the physical therapist to start training my upper body. So when I would sit there and I'd be doing my leg lifts or getting my stem work done, I'd be doing curls, I'd be doing presses. So it started.
How old are you at this point?
It's probably 9 years old when I started my upper body stuff. And then they had given me a routine. My mom had joined like a health and fitness center. And so I would go after school. I was homeschooled a lot, but my freshman year, I had said I was going to walk into high school, and no one believed I could do it, and I did. And so I'm in high school, I'm working out, I'm in the gym. Coach Chait, the football coach at the time, takes us to the weight room. It was the first time I had ever heard AC/DC and Metallica like blasting on speakers. And I'm like, wow, this is like a whole nother level I never knew. And then later that year, I was bullied a lot. Or that whole year I was bullied a lot. And I wouldn't really say bully because when I look back on it, I think that word, I think that being pushed and prodded wasn't a bad thing. You know, there's always a good thing with just having a little weight on you. And it was just kids being kids. And one day they had written, broken in my locker, and they wrote on my glasses, crippled. And I put it on in class, they all started laughing at me. So I went to the gym that day and I hairline fractured my whole pelvis on the leg press. And 3 days later, I refused crutches and I walked into school with a broken pelvis. I just didn't care. And then a few months later, it started again. And then one day I stood up and hit the kid in the mouth. I got suspended. My mom wasn't mad. She was like, I'm proud you stood up for yourself. But she took me to a Kroger's because she had to get groceries. And so I skinned down the aisle. And, you know, I was big into guitar at the time. So I'm like, oh, I want to see what new guitar stuff's out. And I stumble on a Flex magazine. And I'm like, what? You can look like that? And I realized, like, man, if I got big like that, no one would think I'm crippled.
Mess with you, huh?
No one think you think. You know, I was 95 pounds my freshman year of high school.
Wow.
I graduated.
How tall were you?
I'm same height. I've only been 5'2", 5'2" on a good day. So we'll say 5'1" and 3/4. And, you know, I'm walking around like 190, 195 now. So, I mean, you're talking 100 pounds in 28 years. But I've never stopped. I've never known anything other than this. And that's what scares me, is to know what it might be like to not have it. I'm like,
well, maybe you don't have to ever stop.
I hope not. I hope not. But, you know, that's kind of what got me into it was...
Is it? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Is it dangerous to just working with weights now? Like, do you think, you know...
It is.
It is. So at any moment something could happen?
It is. And that was something like I talk about in the later parts of the book. There's examples in there where I broke my leg squatting 4 weeks out from a show. I broke my femur around my rod. And I have a picture in the book of what the leg looked like the next day. When I sent Jason, my coach, who you've met before, Scoob, he was like, dude, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm fine. So I jumped on the step mill and I was doing my left leg only for 60 minutes every day. And I ended up placing second back-to-back shows. But it's really a weird thing because in the gym, people see me, it's like I'm very glazed over. But it's because I have to push that rational part of my brain out that's like, bro, you have a brittle bone disease and you're loading up, you know, 400 pounds on the hack squat, lifting 100, 120-pound dumbbells. Even for a normal person, I assume it's, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. And for me, it's even more so. Because I know at any moment, I train with everything I've got. And I give it all I've got because I've been given a life I was never supposed to have. So I feel the only thing that's right is for me to give it back at 110%. And for whatever reason, this is something I excel at. And I've gone with it. I've just kind of trusted that whatever's above has my back and has want me to do this too. Probably like you can relate with the muse and writing. And it's a mental game, man. And some days, I'll be honest, I'm like, whew, I don't know if I want to do it. And it happens. But my most recent injury was 2018. I broke my hip, vertical leg pressing, and then that was 10 weeks out from a show. I ended up competing still.
So I was going to ask you how long it took you. So you just were competing in Pittsburgh just a few weeks ago, right?
Correct. I did Masters Nationals out there, 42. In January, I was facing a hip surgery. I was facing a potential back surgery, all this stuff. And I just, in my heart, didn't feel like it was right because, you know, when you live in your body for so long and you have this disease, you know what it feels like. And I was like, I don't know if this is it. And I really started working with a chiropractor. I really started doing some stretching, just doing alternate therapies that people didn't really think would work. And I'll be honest, if I were to have to end my bodybuilding career tomorrow, I will take my head out high on it because I ended on a note because in January I wasn't walking. And then in July I was able to walk across the stage and give it my best. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. How would you describe your mindset, Jeff? Like, just is it the same in your regular life as it is when you're training or
That is such a deep, hard question.
I mean,
you said you're pitching me softballs.
How do you do it? You know, how do you do it?
I don't separate it very well. I can be honest. It's hard for me. I'm patiently aggressive. I only know one mode, and that's forward. And I don't know if that always goes well in my personal life, but in other areas it's gone very well. And I think as I've gotten older, I've started realizing now, I think when a man turns his 40s, if you kind of caught on and you're kind of like open to it, it's okay to stop and slow and hear the birds, see what's out there. Where a couple of years ago, that wasn't me. But I've been working on that. I see a therapist every couple months, counselor, and it's just nice to go to have someone you can randomly talk to who helps me land the plane. But my mindset is always trample the white flag. I think every day you wake up, you have a choice, and that's why I tell my youngest son, you either get better, you stay the same, or you just die. It's one of three things, like, you know, and you see so many people who just, through life, somewhere they just sat down and said, this is cool. And I don't want to do that. I want to be able to, what's on the other side? What's a little bit further? How far, for me, it's how far can I take this now? You know?
Would you ever say that this disease, in a way, was a blessing for you?
Oh, 100%. I think, I talked about in the book, I had the right mom at the right time with everything else being right, no internet. Because I think if my mom saw the internet, she'd be like, no, you're never doing that. But she was like, oh my God, you're going to the gym and getting healthy. You know, she was buying my creatine. My gift when I was 18, she bought me my first steroid cycle. Because I told her I was going to do it. And she was like, well, let me make that your birthday gift. And as long as it's, I was like, okay. And I don't know, I had a lot of, I wouldn't say support, but there was nothing that really stood in my way. My dad was out of the picture. My mom was, you know, single mom, doing the best she could, raising, you know, me and my little sister. My older sister had moved out by then. So I think I just got, like, right place, right time. And you know when you kind of sit back, have you ever felt like that you were meant to do this? Like, that you, like, no matter what, you can't rationalize anything else but this damn thing?
Yeah.
No matter how bad you want to go pursue something else, you just can't. You're always dragged back. I've never had fantasies of anything else other than what I do. And, you know, when I approached you about what it would take to write a book after a couple of times of us chatting, you're like, fine, I'll meet with you once a month. And you really helped me pull it together. And that was where I was just like, okay, I can truly do anything I want to do if I really try. And I think bodybuilding gave me that. I think the whole thing was a blessing. I don't look at it. Life happens for you, not to you. I believe that 100%.
Can you tell me how do you make a living, Jeff? I mean, you're a gym owner,
right?
And you train people, but do you mind telling me a little bit about what your business is? Because I think people would be interested in that. You know, how you turned this into a livelihood.
Yeah, so when I was 18, 19, 20, I was bouncing bars in college. I know, crazy, right? Like my bone disease, but I had this chip on my shoulder. So people just kind of like stayed away from me. And I was always cool to people. And it was a great time. Like, I learned a lot about people by being in a bar scene, oddly enough. And then I got a job with the Department of Homeland Security. And I started traveling around, did that for 2 years, helping meet the congressional deadlines after 9/11, because 9/11 stood up the Department of Homeland Security, which was the first time the government had ever done like a big, massive hiring, all these agencies and so forth. So my dad, because he lived in San Diego, so it was a phone relationship, he's like, I really think you should go for this, Jeff. You know, you don't need to have a college degree. I was finishing up my college degree. And I was like, okay, so I went, got sworn in next to Ground Zero in 2002 in October. And I traveled for those 2 years, and I picked Nashville as my home. I couldn't get back to Knoxville. They had filled up the airport spots, but Nashville had some. And I started working out this gym, Gold's Gym down the street from me. And this trainer guy kept bugging me, Steven, to like train people. And I was like, no, they're stupid. All they do is stretch girls and hold clipboards. And he's like, no, I'm doing something different. So a few months had gone by, I had watched him. But in the course of it, he had watched the guy who was training with me as I was preparing for my first show ever. So I don't know about you, but it took me 10 years before I ever stepped in the arena of bodybuilding. I felt like I was not good enough for 10 years before I ever tried it. And then when I tried it, I was like, okay. So a guy who's legally disabled didn't do bad. Like, I mean, I was kind of like not bad at it. I was like, okay, and I got bit by it. But he saw my workout partner change. He dropped like 50 pounds getting ready with me. And he's like, just come for an interview. And I was like, fine. And they were paying what I was making at Homeland Security, training people. And I was like, I remember I went home, I told my wife at the time, I was like, I just can't do any more overtime at Homeland Security. It's a very Seward environment when you work for the government. Just people always trying to get your job, people always trying to do that. And it was weird because I was showing up at a place that people were paying me to be there and excited to get their butt kicked in and everything else in between. And it's kind of spilled into this woman one day came and picked me up, and I'd helped her hit her goal, and she had wanted to look good in this sexy piece of lingerie on her 10-year anniversary. And it was at that point I was kind of like, man, I think this might be for me. And so I filled up a book within 6 months. I was on a wait list to get with me at night. And then one day after I was like my 5th year, exactly on my 5th year, I said, I'm out. I left Homeland Security. I took a whole jump into personal training right as the recession was beginning in 2008, and it blew up. And from that path, you know, I started in-person training. I was lucky enough to be able to get into a gym that I've been so beyond blessed with the people that have helped me build that, because it's not just me. I get a lot of the accolades, but I'm always like, no, it's the Katie, it's Thera, it's, you know, Ben, all these other people who've come along, Landon, and so forth.
Your gym now? So you bought it at some point.
So what happened? That happened. So in 2014, the old owner threw me out because I was mad he wasn't showing up for his clients. I'm like, bro, just let me have your clients. You can charge me more rent, but you're making us all look bad. So he got mad, threw me out. So I went up the street because I was in the street. And I started training people in my apartment, and it blew up in my apartment. I was like couldn't do anymore. So by then he had hit financial troubles. Note to people out there, drugs and alcohol are not your friend when you're trying to run a business. And it kind of tore him down. And then he was going to close the business. And me and Derek, he's now deceased, he was my business partner. We said, well, I guess it's us. And we put some money together, scrounged it together. And in 2015, we had 41 members. And then now as of today, we're over 1,000.
Wow.
So, and the best part about it is I built it completely debt-free. So as I got money, because I make my money on my training, and I was just able to pour everything back into the gym, so I was able to create that. But what I do now is I do a lot of online coaching. So working with people online from all sorts, all throughout the world, helping them with nutrition, helping with their gut health, reading their hormone stuff, helping them with workouts. Really, the internet and even COVID made people get together in a really unique way throughout what we would call the internet and allow social media and so forth. I mean, that's how we met. And yeah, that's really kind of how I do it, man. I'm an online coach, an in-person coach. And there's nothing.
You have a podcast. I mean, that's how we met.
Yep. And I have a seminar that me and Jason do together. So where we bring coaches in to present throughout the U.S. and to help educate other coaches.
An in-person seminar.
Yeah, we do it in my gym.
Nashville?
Yeah, we do it in my gym and stuff. So I've been very, very lucky. We've done a few throughout the U.S., but I've been very, very lucky to have like that. My life has been all because of the people I met. Nothing less. And I think that that's something people should think more about.
What's next? What's the next 5 years?
Well, I hope that, you know, and this is something like, I think you have those dreams, right? And you think about where you really want to go. And I don't know, I think that the motivational space is like too fluffy. And I think so many people out there are writing things to just motivate you and not talking about like how hard life is, but how you come back from getting knocked down. No one ever talks about how you stand back up. And no one ever gives a hand. You should never look down on someone unless you're giving them a hand back up, is my view. And I really would like to get into the speaking world and really start working with people, maybe high-level execs, like mindsets, helping people just, you know, really, Steven, it's just to start believing in themselves. It's, to me, sad how many people don't believe in themselves anymore.
How do you get back up after you've been knocked down? If you were teaching me, let's say right now, what would you tell me?
So there's so many ways. I mean, I think some people are negatively motivated in the sense of like, almost like a, I could bear a word, like a fuck you list, you know, something like that. You know, for me it was, I had to prove Dr. M wrong. I had to prove my dad wrong, because my dad was like, always made me feel like, oh, you're weak, you're scrawny, you're just a crippled kid. You know, just certain things, axes, chips I had to do. I think journaling was a great one for me, writing. You know, I was writing before me and you even talked. But I think your mind confuses you, but when it comes out on paper, It's less confusing as you start putting it together. But when it comes to belief in self, I think everybody's always looking for someone to help them, and they have to realize the help comes from within. And they have to figure out why they want help, why they want to help themselves. And you read those books like, well, do this, do that. I'm like, yeah, I have gratitude. I mean, I think we all do, right? Like, you have a little gratitude, life's good. Maybe not so much gratitude when it's bad. But I think people tend to focus on the negative. I'm like, hey, if you're focused on the negative like I am, I don't like to lose, then you have to use that as fuel. And I think we get misaligned on that. People be like, oh, that's the wrong way of looking at it. I'm like, but is it? If it's your own axe to grind that makes you want to get better, it's only between you and yourself and I. Like, who cares about that? But I'd probably tell you, Steven, just get off your ass and do it. And I think more people just need to hear that. Because they're always looking for this pill, this one book, this one affirmation, this one journal, this one church, this one whatever you want to say, and it always lets them down. And I'm like, why don't you just stop letting other things let you down? And it's a lot easier, I found, to let yourself down. Because when you let yourself down, you can at least go, okay, what was that because I chose to, or is that the process of failure making me better? Because failure makes you better. And I think when you go back to, when you're on a journey to believe in yourself, you have to look at failure as the ultimate guide to getting better.
You know, I sort of, you ever see the movie Scared Straight?
Yeah, some of that stuff's crazy what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about that for my own sort of life, and I think that sometimes, like you had all the shit that you went through, breaking bones and stuff like that, and that was a sort of a thing that you could say, I'm never going back to that place, you know?
Yeah.
Like people who have had troubles with addiction or alcohol or something, and have been in that kind of a hell where they turn the corner and they say, I am never going back there. Or people say, I'm never going back to jail. You know, they can kill me, I'm never going back there. And which is a kind of form of negative. And I sort of feel the same way about my life when I was fucking up and, you know, was just, you know, at a loss. And I just said at some point to myself, I'm not going back there, you know? And however bad it is right now, facing whatever I have to face, whatever work I have to do or whatever challenge there is, it's nothing compared to that.
Right.
So it's easy to do what I'm going to do now, because at least I'm sane and I can do it. I can put the work in front of me and I can do it. So that's sort of my version of what I imagine you're talking about.
Yeah. What made you want to believe in yourself, though? Like, what was that defining moment where you just said, I'm over this shit?
Well, there are a lot of defining moments, but...
one that you just have to say, that's it. That's the genesis. That's the one that just said, enough. Because I know what mine was, and I'll share that with you after I hear
Okay, we'll do that.
I'll share it with you after that.
Well, I actually, I wrote about this moment in The War of Art, and it was a moment where I had been running away from writing for a long time. I'd tried to write kind of originally when I was 22 years old or something, tried to write a novel, blah, blah, blah. You know, 7 or 8 years went by, and I was in this sublet apartment in New York City, and I just was about to either go out and get drunk or chase women or do some sort of form of distraction, and I just said to myself, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I know how bad this is, so I got out my old typewriter that I hadn't, you know, typed anything on in like 7 years. And I thought, let me just try to write something. And I knew it was going to be crap. Well, I didn't have any idea what it was, but I thought this is going to be totally pointless, just a waste and painful thing. But I sat there for a couple hours, and at the end of that, I had a few pages, which I sort of immediately threw away because they were worthless. But I realized, I went back in to wash some dishes that were in the sink. This is in The War of Art, right?
Yeah.
And I realized as I was washing them that I was whistling. And I thought, you know, like you whistle when you're happy. And I just sort of thought to myself, something just changed in me. You know, I was able to sit down and write. Shitty as it may be, whatever it was, not only was I able to do it, but it made me feel better. Probably like you felt, you know, at the gym or something like that. And I thought, I've turned a corner somehow. This thing that used to torture me is now a source of sustenance for me, a source of strength for me. And so I thought, it may take me another 30 years, which it did, before I had any kind of success, but at least I've found that I can sit down and do what I know I was meant to do. And So that was a big turning point for me. It took forever after that, but at least I had that.
What was it? Was it hard for you to run away from what you were wanting to do for so long? Because I look back sometimes, I'm like, damn, on some of the stuff I've run away from, like I spent so much time trying to get away from it, I should have just hit it head on and just got through it, you know?
It's easy to say that once you
through it on the other side.
Once you've done it, but I think sometimes you got to go through all of that period of being lost, what I like to call a passage through the wilderness, before you finally can do that thing. You could theoretically you could have done it at the very start, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But it's like an addiction thing, or struggling with alcoholism or something like that. I think you need that moment when you kind of hit rock bottom.
I think that teaches people more lessons.
That's that sort of scared straight moment where you just say, enough of this shit. I just can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. After that happened, what changed the next day for you? Because often people have that one moment, but what happened the next day? Because I know, and I'll share I know what the next day was. So I'm curious to see what it was for you.
Everything really did change that day, Jeff.
Yeah.
It was like the next day I sat down again and tried to write something, and maybe it wasn't every day, but at that point I was on a path, like I'm sure you were, for the gym or for whatever it was, where I knew that I was just going to keep doing this, and it might take me forever. I didn't even have a goal of,
wow.
It wasn't like I thought, I have an idea for a book and I want to write it, or I have a long-range goal, I want to get good and I want to, write for the movies or something like that. It was just, I just found this activity, sitting at the typewriter, that made me feel sane. I would sit down feeling crazy. Things are going, things are getting out of control in my, I'm thinking in that bad spiral thing. And when I would get up after 2 hours or 3 hours, I felt sane. And I felt like I had that work that I'd put in justified my day on the planet, that I was doing what I was supposed to do. So I knew I was on a track. I didn't know where I was going or anything like that, but at least I felt like I'd found, sometimes it's like you might find a diet kind of food that you're going to be okay with, right? Whatever, and that was what it was for me. So it did change completely. Yeah. So what were you going to say, Jeff?
So mine was when my leg broke. So before that, there was this.
What age now were we talking?
So that was like right after
when
I started showing 11. It was 11 going on 12. And the physical therapist I've been working with, D, put his hand on my shoulder when that happened and said, "I'll see you soon." And he walked away, and I could tell he was upset. And then the very next day, I went and saw Dr. M, and he was like, "Yeah, you're forever going to have a wheelchair or crutches. These bones are just too soft." And I remember being young, like, fuck this. like, I'm not doing that. And after that, I started, once I got the okay, I went back to physical therapy. And D had really challenged me as my mindset as a young kid. He's like, you have to learn to lean into the pain. He's like, pain is progress. Now, unfortunately, that didn't do good for me in my adult years because it made me be like, well, if my whole life isn't pain, then something's not right. So I had to go through all that. And I talked about that in the book, and it led me to a really dark place. Because back then, they didn't talk about mental health in the 80s. So no doctors were paying any bit of attention to that with me. And I was in a really dark place. But it was after that, I was just like, you know what? I got nothing to lose. Like, what else could happen? My leg breaks, and it just really settled in with me, like, this is gonna have to hurt to get better. And I think a lot of people just don't want to do that. When you talk to people about stuff, it's like, well, what happens if my book doesn't sell? Well, okay, well, you write another book. You know what I mean? What happens if my business doesn't take off? Okay, well, you create another business. And I think so many people just get hit one too many. You hit once, they're out. And that was one of those where I just, like you, just kept being hammered until something happened where I was like, no, this isn't right anymore. But that was it for me. I went on that. That's where that chip on my shoulder came from, where I was like, no, I'm proving this dude wrong. And I set my first goal was I'm going to walk into school my high school year because they've been homeschooling me. And I did. I achieved that goal. So, and at that point, I was like, I can really kind of do stuff, So,
yeah. I mean, I had a sort of a revelation that when I was at my darkest hour, where I said, this is going to sound pretty ordinary, as I say it, but I thought to myself, I can't make other people do what I want them to do. I can't make somebody love me or respect me or hire me. I can't make other people do what I want them to do, but I can make myself do what I want to do. You know, I can make myself sit down and do my work or whatever it is. I can crack the whip over myself. And I thought, well, shit, man, nothing can stop me if I do that, you know? And that was sort of another kind of a turning point for me.
When you realized you were the master of your own ship.
Yeah, or at least I realized I can inflict pain on myself and endure it, you know?
Did you spread that anywhere else? Did that go anywhere else in your life? For me, when I got in my 20s, I was like, oh, well, you got to be in pain with me. You know what I mean? Like, pain's progress. We're getting better.
No, I didn't inflict it on anybody. But I don't think, you know, you say mental health. I think some people might say that attitude is kind of a sick attitude, you know?
Right.
But I don't think it is. In fact, I think it's a healthy attitude.
I agree.
You know, I was just watching The Last Dance, that series about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, you know?
So phenomenal, that quote where he's crying. He's like, they might not have liked how I was, but they didn't mind the result. I was like, I could feel that. Yeah, I could feel that.
Or, you know, where his dad said of him, you know, just tell him that he can't do something and he'll prove to you that he can do it, you know? So that, you could say that's kind of a sick attitude, but I don't think it is. I think we all are sort of driven in that way, I think. Because, I don't know, life is hard, right?
100%.
To accomplish anything at all in the face of your own self-sabotage, your own stuff that goes on in your head, forget about external obstacles or rivals or competitors. That's easy. It's, you know, your own self.
Right.
So if you're going to overcome that, you got to dig deep like you have. You know, that's why I admire you so much, Jeff, you know, that you're really up against something that would have broken the spirit of a lot of other people, including me. And you didn't, you know. So let me ask you this. When you say you were at a really dark place, tell me a little bit about that. What was that dark place?
So I remember as a kid, and I talked about this in my book, I remember if I wasn't in pain, like once that turned to me, and Dee was like, you should accept this challenge almost. And I was like, okay, I'll accept the challenge, you know? And I went like into just this room where it was dark with myself, and it was pain is progress. So I was doing more work than they wanted me to do at home. But if I wouldn't feel, I'd hurt myself. So I'd either cut myself, I'd, you know, just slam a door on my, just something, because pain was what made me feel alive. That was what it was. And then it didn't really shift. So I stopped self-inflicting. And then what it was, well, bodybuilding's great and this stuff's great, but my personal life seems good. I should set that on fire. You know what I mean? I should do dumb things that keeps me in a constant state of pain. Until one day I was just like, you know, I'm tired of this. And I took a bunch of pills and hoped for the best, you know, and it didn't really go that way. And
took a bunch of pills, you mean like kill yourself?
Yeah, like I pulled up, popped my RX-8 sunroof at the time I had, lay back for a nap, woke up like maybe 30 minutes later throwing up. And I was like, well, shit, you can't even kill yourself right. You know what I mean? And it was one of those moments where I remember driving around for a little bit. I was very much out of it. And then the next day I got up and went to work and like nothing happened. This older couple I trained like sat me down and like, where were you? That's unlike you. And I was like, well, and then they're like, you need a week away. I was like, I don't have the money. I can't afford to go away. And I took the week away. I went and did some counseling every day for a week. I did it out of the city too. I left my cell phone at home, my laptop, so no one could get a hold of me. And it was starting then that process where I was just like, I realized what it was is I couldn't shut off what was going on in my head as far as like, I felt like I deserved pain at all times. That I didn't understand that there was a balance to that. Like my mental health was strictly pain driven, pain induced, pain result, da-da-da-da-da. I mean, I was probably a horrible person to work with at Homeland Security. My bosses, I used to fight them all the time, like, they're stupid, you know? And I just enjoyed being that constant state. So medicines didn't work for me. I ended up talking about in my book, but I ended up having to use psychedelics to really help me through that. And it was just peeling apart memories that would just bother me. Like, I mean, still to this day, I don't have the same visceral effects, But up until probably I started really using psychedelics, I'd wake up at least 1-2 nights a week, drenched in sweat, just going back to that memory where they were breaking my leg and me trying to get them to stop and they wouldn't stop. So that's where it started. I wanted to shift out to you though and ask you a question, because have you ever written something in a book of yours that made you mourn for a part of who you were to a degree? Well, we had to take a break for a minute because Sam, the videographer, as you all know, he mistracked the sun. Apparently the sun came out a little bit quicker, so we scooted around. But I was asking Steven, was there something you've ever written in a book that you kind of like, once you were done with it, stepped back and went, damn, like that part of me is like completely gone, changed. Like there was a part when I wrote in my book, and I'll give you my example so you could think for a second.
Okay.
I know it's a hell of a question because I was like, my first time writing the book, I don't know if it's like right or wrong, but I remember I finished the chapter when I went through all that stuff with D, and he put his hand on me and said, see you soon. That's where like I mourned for myself. Like I remember like I got it, like after I got done, I went, I smoked it, took a hit on my joint, and I went up, I took like a very hot shower for 30 minutes. I was just sitting there, I remember just like letting the water hit me. I'm like, man, that was it. That was where free, I love everything and everybody, and Jeff, changed that one moment. And like I wrote it and I realized like, wow, that was it. You know what I mean? Because the way it came out, the words, it perfectly illustrated exactly that metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly or whatever you want to say.
To answer from my side of that, most of my books are not about me, right? So, in fact, there's only really been one that's about me. And I didn't have a moment like that in that, but I certainly have had other moments where I will break down in tears over, but it may be a scene that's completely different from any, it's something from 2,000, years ago or something like that, Gates of Fire or something like that, where I'll realize that on some level, and sometimes, usually I can't put my finger on it, it's about something really deep inside of me. But I would say, no, I haven't had a moment where I mourned for a part of myself, literally.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive. So I have a question to ask you about writing, because when we met, I remember it was after the second time you came on the podcast, I fired you off an email, and you're like, we were talking and we had closed, and you're like, Jeff, you got a really unique story. And I was like, yeah. And then I thought about it. I was like, I wonder what it would be like to write a book. And then you were kind of giving me ideas and so forth. But what do you think fear is to a writer? Like, what do you think that word fear does to a writer to either make them not do it or do it?
It's a great question. Certainly, fear is a huge part of why you don't write, and it's a huge part. I mean, it's resistance with a capital R,
Correct.
When you're writing fiction, let's say, you are absolutely going into the unknown each day, at least in a first draft, because you don't know you don't know what the scene's going to be. You don't know who's going to say anything, and you certainly don't know if it's going to work, And if it doesn't work, it would be like going to the gym and you're in the squat rack and you drop the bar and that kind of thing.
Right.
So, to me, I think the process of writing is more about overcoming fear than it is about anything else, than it is about skill or empathy or anything like that. And I think that's what stops more people than anything else. They're afraid of failing. I certainly feel that way, or afraid of succeeding. That, I think, in many ways, that's an even bigger fear, But yeah, it's all about fear, I think, to me, writing. Anything is, It's a high wire act. You don't know what's out there, and you don't know if you're going to succeed at doing it.
Do you think that, what would then, so you define fear really well for a writer. What would confidence look like for a writer? Like, I see some of these writers just bust out book after book, and you're telling me you've got like 87 already done. They're just going to keep coming out for the next 400 years.
For me, there isn't any such thing as confidence, other than maybe like you, that you can go into the gym, you can make yourself do a full workout at the highest level that you want to do. That's really sort of all that I know as a writer, is that I can make myself sit down after all these years and give it everything I've got for the time that until I'm too tired to do it anymore. But I never sit down and think, oh, I've got this knocked, no problem. It's always, for me, tremendous self-doubt, which I think is a good thing. I've come to that realization. And again, you're going into the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen on the next page, the next minute, the next sentence, the next whatever it is. And so I'm never confident, except in the fact that I know that I can force myself to keep going. Mm-hmm. And usually by the end of the day, something good has happened.
This is one thing that has intrigued me about you as a writer, because I don't see it often, but your ability to go from fiction to nonfiction and kind of flutter back and forth, what do you give that credit to? Is it just a passion for writing? Is it just a draw of the creative in you? What is it? Because I just am like, I wrap my mind around it well, what do I want to do next? Well, maybe this, maybe that. But you seem to flow, almost toggling back and forth, just really smoothly.
Well, that's a great question, Jeff. Certainly the first, well, I'll give you a long answer.
I love long answers. Pick them apart.
The first 3 books that I wrote that never got published, that just wound up in a drawer, were all like these kind of callow, autobiographical stuff, right? I mean, whatever, just really bad stuff that you don't want to deal with. Then at some point I had kind of a breakthrough, and I've written about this in somewhere, where I said to myself, I was so disgusted with that, I said, I am never writing about myself ever again. Everything I'm going to write I'm going to make up. It's going to be pure fiction. I'm going to pull it right out of my ass, And that was a huge breakthrough for me.
Really?
I remember that the first thing I wrote under that was a screenplay, and it was the first screenplay I ever wrote, and it was a prison story. And I don't know anything about prison. I've never been in prison, but I just pulled it out of my butt, and people really responded well to that. And so after that, I just said, I'm just making it up, everything. So for me, the first, 6 or 7 books that I wrote were pure fiction. They were historical fiction or whatever it is. And then, so I'd never had bounce back and forth from fiction to nonfiction. And the first nonfiction book I wrote was The War of Art.
Yeah, what made you write that?
And that was just because I had, friends had asked me, since by that point I had become a professional writer and I was able to make a living at it. And so friends would say, I got a book in me, please help me, get started with it, sort of like what you said to me. And so I would sit down with them and I would kind of try to warn them about resistance with a capital R, And in other words, the content of that book, The War of Art, I had already talked it 30 times, And finally I just said, because nobody ever listened to me, I'd give them this real pep talk, and they would never do anything.
No.
So finally, I just said, "This is bullshit. I'm just going to put this down on paper." I thought I would not even publish it. And then when somebody would come to me, I'd just say, "Here, read this," because I'm not going to sit up until 2 a.m. with you, and then you're not going to write anything. So that was how The War of Art came. So now for the first time, I had done nonfiction, and but it wasn't. It was just talking about writing. It was like me, I'm a writer here. Okay, now I'm talking about it, So then I'm also a believer, I'm a believer in the muse. I believe that you get inspired by something, that sort of the next book comes to you as an idea. And so then I've really just followed that, Jeff. Like, if the next book is fiction, then I'll do that. And if the one that comes after that is nonfiction, I'll do that. And so it hasn't been hard to do that.
There was maybe 10 years between The War of Art and Turning Pro? Because Turning Pro came out in 2012.
Yeah, probably was, yeah.
So we're on year 13 of it.
Yeah.
11 years later.
But there was another book in between called Do the Work.
Do the Work, correct. Yeah. What changed from War of Art to Turning Pro? What did you go through in that span that made you go, I have to write Turning Pro? Did the muse talk to you? Because you even have a ritual about the muse, from what you had told me before, like how you sit down and kind of get in the zone and get ready to go kick ass and take names.
You know, I just sort of felt like there was a lot more things to say that I hadn't really said in the War of Art. You know, the middle part of the War of Art, as you know, is called Turning Pro. It's about that whole idea of you know, not thinking of yourself as an amateur anymore, but thinking of yourself as a professional. But I just thought, I got to expand on that. There's more to be said here. And also, you know, there was a certain mercenary aspect of it. If I wanted to follow a book, I wanted to do, you know, more on the subject. And that's kind of, there have been a bunch of other books since then that are kind of follow-ups to the War of Art. And they're all sort of aspects that I hadn't thought about then, but I thought, oh, this is important. You know, this is an idea that somebody that is trying to be a writer should hear about. And I haven't read it anyplace else, so I'll write it, you know?
Right.
Like the artist's journey is another one of those things. That's a whole different concept, but it's in the same vein.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What, everyone talks about legacy, so this conversation we can have. What do you want your legacy to be remembered as, or what are you working towards it to be remembered as? Because you see that now, your legacy, it's in every business, everything. It's like,
I don't even want to think about it, you know. I mean,
I'm the same boat. I'm legitimately like, I'll think about it when I
thinking about that. Then you're in your ego then, and that's no good, you know.
Yeah.
So everybody's going to forget whatever you've done, whatever, you know. Yeah, I don't want to even think about that.
So you're just living life free then?
Yeah, I'm just trying to put out whatever the next thing is, whatever the muse wants me to do, I'll do it, and you know, whatever people think of it, they'll think of it. But I don't want to think about it myself.
Have you ever fought the muse?
Have I ever done what?
Fought the muse and been like, no. I'm not doing that. I'm doing this.
Never.
Never?
She's a goddess. You know, you can't fight her. The only thing you can do is to serve her.
100%. Where do you, if you had one piece of advice, because I know we've talked a lot about the writing journey and all that, and a lot of people, I think writing is becoming more of a lost art. You know, you don't really see a lot of people writing much anymore. You don't really see a lot of people that's mostly scrolling on a phone.
I mean, there's like 1 million books a year being
read. True. I mean, are they 1 million good books? You know?
Good.
You know, with AI, who knows where that goes. Right. But if you had to give one piece of advice outside of resistance to a writer, what would you say would be the biggest thing? Because I know for me, it was you being like, hey, I'm going to meet with you once a month, and kind of kept me going. I was like, well shit, I gotta show up with something. I can't just take this guy who's a well-known author and be like, yeah, I didn't write anything. I just had a lot of like waste of time. What would be something, would you recommend, like a accountability of some kind? What would you say besides resistance and just getting your ass in the seat?
That's a great question.
I'm taking your 2 options off the table for you.
I'm going to say something, and I don't know if this is really an answer to the question, Jeff, but it's something that I've been thinking about lately. That the average person, well, let's say a person that's not a writer or not an artist, where do they get their sustenance from, you know? Their soul sustenance, right? And mostly it's from their family, from their kids, from people that they love, people that are close to them. And usually, like, when it comes down to crunch time, it comes to your deathbed, family is what it's all about, right? Or there are other people that may have a cause. You know, they may believe in something religious or something political or whatever it is, but almost always it's involved with other people. But if you're a writer, you get your sustenance, and this is what makes writers hard to live with. You get, like, I go into that room, that's my office right over there, and I close the door, and Diana, my significant other, my better half, I'm in the office and the door's closed. And what's happened is I'm getting my sustenance from that place that I go to when I'm writing a story, you know? And I'm sure it's the same for a choreographer or a cinematographer or an editor or whatever it is. And in a way, it makes you kind of a monster, because you really are, when all is said and done, that's the most important thing in the world for you. If they took that away from you, you'd be lost, you know? So again, I would say to somebody that wants to be a writer, if that's not your mindset, you may be a person that writes, but you're not a writer, you know?
That's the differential.
And not that being a writer is a be-all and end-all. I don't think it is. It's kind of a crazy way to live. Like being an athlete is a crazy way to live. So I don't know if that's a piece of advice I would give to anybody.
I think it's real.
I would characterize that's the life you're getting into, you know. Like there are certain guys on Instagram or on the internet that are real warriors. I mean, warriors fighting wars, right? Career Marines, career Special Forces guys, and their world is war,
right?
You know, and if you're the spouse of one of those people, that's a tough life, you know. Right. But I can understand it, you know. If you took that away from them, they wouldn't know what to do. Now, my hope for them would be that at some point they'd grow out of that and they'd mature beyond that. But I certainly understand that there's that place that they go to where they get the sustenance that they need. It's kind of a sad thing when you're killing people.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's really about killing people for them. It's about testing themselves in the face of fear, you know? But that's another thing.
No. Do you think that people don't test themselves enough in the face of fear?
No, I guess I was going to, as I said.
I mean, I was like, that's a whole other journey.
That's really what everything really is, you know?
Mm-hmm. I'd asked you on a podcast because at the time I was looking at life as a series of regrets I was trying to avoid to get to the end, somewhat smiling like, hey, I didn't totally fuck it up. But I never asked you this. What is something you can look back on and say, man, I'm glad I didn't screw that up? Like that hit landed perfectly, something near and dear to your heart that you're like, I'm glad for whatever reason, that landed smooth.
Fix your mic real quick, it's showing.
Oh.
I just got to flip it in. Oop, there you go.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
He's master editor, so.
I mean, I would say there's certainly a bunch of books that I've written, most of them, where I do feel like they landed good, you know? And whereas a lot of the writing that I did before I started writing books, screenplays and stuff like that, they didn't land good, you know? It wasn't really me. But I felt like in a bunch of those things where, you know, the muse gave me an assignment and I delivered on it, you know, as good as I could deliver.
What do you mean it wasn't really you, though?
I had about a 10-year career as a screenwriter.
Yeah, I remember you told us Steven Seagal, all the crazy stuff.
A lot of that stuff. And I was trying hard on all of them, and I wrote a few that were good that never got made, that nobody ever saw. But they were really, like I would pick a genre like a Western. I said, well, let me write a Western. I have an idea for a Western. But in some way, it wasn't the same as the books I've written. The books were coming from another source. You know, I was writing those movies with my head, but once I actually started writing books, they were coming from another place, you know.
The place of the heart?
Yeah. And they were coming from a mysterious place, you know. I didn't even recognize myself as I was doing them.
When you write, do you find that sitting alone is good for you, and you think that most people should actually do more of that? Because that was the one thing, you know, when we had talked about writing the book, you're like, hey, you need to put your ass in that seat. You need to block off the hours and you do it. I took it to heart. But there were many times, man, I'd be like, what do I want to do here? And it was very uncomfortable at times sitting by myself and having to just sit there and like wait for it to come to me. Do you think people like avoid that at all costs, which is what maybe skirts them away from the things they should be doing?
I suppose that's true. I mean, for me, it's the opposite. It's like when I sit down there and I am alone, that's when I feel like this is where I should be, you know? So yeah, I never feel lonely or anything like that in that instance, you know.
That's interesting.
Because I'm always in the story. I'm with the characters in the story. And a lot of times the characters are realer to me than people in my real life. In fact, they're almost always realer to me than people in my real life.
That's interesting.
So, and that's where a lot of the sustenance comes from.
So when I was writing my book, there were times I really hated myself. Like, and it forced me to dodge, like, wanting to write something. Because I was like, this is already painful enough to type out. Why am I continuing to pull this flesh back? And That was something I was curious about. I didn't know if it was me sitting there by myself or it was me actually having to face what was staring me down.
Because what you write is about yourself, at least in Brittle to Unbreakable, is so cathartic and so raw. I was thinking, this must feel great to you. No? I mean, to get it out, to express it, to tell the story that's been in your head forever. Am I right?
It was, because I look back and I was like, holy shit, that was a wild, like, 1 in a million shot through life. But there was parts of me, like I said, that I mourned. Like, I know that, like, I had a strain on my parents' relationship, which ultimately ended. Not close to my sisters because of the care I had to have. All sorts of little things. I mean, I made peace with it.
Not little things, yeah.
Yeah, but the book made me just kind of go, like, it allowed me to stitch up wounds, I guess is what it was. So it was very hard for me to write because it was like, I remember I wrote the chapter about psychedelics. I told my friend, I was like, literally, I feel like I'm a crazy ass for, like, writing about that it packs all these other things that work. I had to turn to something that was legal to help fix me, and it actually did. And so there was, like, maybe a little bit of, like, oh, how's this going to land? But when I got done with it, and I went through the first editing, because you were like, you got to keep editing. And I was like, okay, I'll do one. And you're like, no, Jeff, like 10 more times. And I was like, okay. It was as I went through that first pass-through that I was like, okay, this is done. It's out.
Yeah.
But until I did that first pass-through, I was very much like, do I even like who I am after I did this? So,
which I think is pretty normal, actually. But did you ever feel like, as you're working on it, this is going to help people? Did you feel, or was it more of a cathartic thing for you?
I felt like it was going to help people in the sense of being like, okay, you can really, if you really believe in yourself and can find that will, it'll do you good. And I think I was I think it'll help people be like, okay, so we're all a little fucked up. And all of us need a little different way to get through that. And I think that will resonate with people because people see a very imperfect life because I'm just very honest about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like why it's not a Goggins story. It's not a fairy tale. It's literally just a life of a lot of, just so you know, I haven't shared this, but my subtitle to the book is My Journey to Redefine Suffering. And that's why I was able to come back with. Like I was able to be like, okay, it literally was a journey of suffering and it all kind of came out good in the end. You know, nothing makes me happier when I see the kids with OI who will find me on Instagram and be like, oh my God, I didn't believe this was possible. So that's why I will go until something tragic happens to my body. But I realized like afterwards, yeah, it would help people in ways of just being like, damn, we all have a sad story and it's a matter of response to the sad story. Like I know yours, you know, you were like, what was it, the cat Mo, where you're hanging out, all that stuff. So, you know, you're in this dark place. You have to ask yourself, was it worth it? And I can look back and say the book was worth it. My life was worth it in the way I lived it.
Yeah, I think you really did a great thing in getting it on paper, you know?
Absolutely.
And not easy the first time through, is it, you know?
No. It challenged me in ways because, I don't know, I almost thought differently because I grew up reading Dungeons and Dragons, all these fantasy books. So I was always like, man, maybe writing a fantasy book would be better. Because it was really hard to sit down and like have an honest assessment of my life and just write it through as the story it was, because there were parts of it that just really tore at me. You know, I wish I had had the family that some of those people had. I wish I had been able to pursue baseball like I wanted to, but I got handed these cards and I played the best possible hand I could with them. And that's what the book taught me. But I almost feel like an autobiography, and maybe you can relate to this. Like if you're, you know, when you wrote Government Cheese, you look back at it, and yeah, it helps you get it out. But there's parts of you kind of sit back in a wonderment, and then you kind of go, but what if? I walked away with some what ifs. Not regrets, but what ifs.
Yeah. Alternative futures that didn't happen.
Earth 2.
But that's life, you know?
It is 100%.
Well, for sure, your book is going to help a lot of people. I mean, it inspired me just to think, you know, if Jeff can overcome this shit, you know, wow, you know?
Yeah.
What I'm going through is nothing compared to what he's going through or what he went through.
I appreciate that. And
because it's so real and true, it's not somebody making shit up.
You know, that's interesting that you said that about if I inspire you, right? Think about what you inspired me to do. Like, this book can't come out to inspire other people unless you took the time to help inspire me to write it. With that being said, I have to ask. I have one more question after this. This is like A and B. What made you choose to sit down and meet with me every month to help me get this going? What was it? Was it the story? Was it just something that you kind of like, I think this needs to be heard? Or is it just like, it's really like, I don't know, like, what was it?
I think it was an instinct. I think it was you. I just liked you. And also, I think that that your story was so sort of interesting, and you were so authentic about it. But also, I think I had an instinct that you were going to be somebody who would actually write the motherfucker, you know, and would not just talk about it, you know.
Right.
And I also thought, I'd like to read this book when it gets done. And I felt, like I say, I felt like you would actually do it, and that it would be good for you, you know, that the whole process, because it's a hell of a thing to write a book, you know.
It is.
Particularly a book about yourself, where it's changed your whole life, you know. It's a hell of a thing, and I think now that you've gone through that process, I would imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, that you own it a little more than maybe you used to. You probably look back and see yourself as an 11-year-old kid and think, wow, where did I get the balls to do that at 11 or whatever it was?
Yeah.
Is that true? Do you feel like you own that experience a little more than you did?
I'm able to step into that and say, no, that was really me, really my life. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm actually proud of it. And I think, like I said, before I wrote that book and went through that first editing, I was probably ashamed of it, of my life to some degree, because of all the just stuff. Yeah, because, you know, I really held it real deep about just what that journey did to my mom. Her constant care of me and stuff like that. And her and I aren't close anymore, and that's just unfortunate. But I can never take away that she forced me to grow the spine I did and to face life head on, knowing that this was never going to change for me. And I think I ran away from that for a long time. I think I was always looking for things to change. I was looking for bodybuilding to change this, or a business to change it, or something. And the reason I love bodybuilding, because I remember the first time I did it, man, on the stage, I was like 5th out of 18. Everyone was 30 pounds heavier than me. And I remember coming off stage, I was so happy with my 5th place trophies team. I was like, oh my God. And the next week I went on and did it again. And I liked it because I had the difference in my legs. I had my scars, but I could still show up as a legally disabled cripple, in quotes, and kick some ass. And it gave me that fuel to kind of get going. And then it just became this uncontrollable thing that I couldn't stop. And I owe it all to the childhood I had, you know? And I think that that's an interesting thing when people talk about all their trauma in their past lives, and, you know, they're like, in my youth I had all this trauma. And I'm like, man, my trauma was awful, but it was good to me too. Like, it forced me to get uncomfortable and say, I'm either gonna knock this motherfucker out or it's gonna knock me out. But one of two things is gonna happen. And I don't think if I had written that book, I would have gotten the ownership of, I'm the guy with the brittle bone disease who did that. And before that, I was the guy who had a brittle bone disease who didn't want to be known for doing that. And now I'm cool with, no, I did that. I'll own it. I'll step out my life.
Did you ever look back on the character that you were writing about, in other words, yourself,
right,
and look at it like it was another person? It wasn't even you?
Yeah, there were parts of that. Because I would look back, especially the youth stuff, and I was like, damn. Like, you know, like, what really started it, that process was I was excavating a lot of stuff through counseling years beforehand. And I got into writing some of those out. And some of them were so painful. Like, the chapter They Broke My Leg was actually the last chapter I wrote in the book. And it's early in the book. Because I couldn't go back and finish the damn thing. Because it was just so, for whatever reason, punishing to me. And lack of a better word there, I don't know. There was part of me where I felt like, why did I have to go through that? But then I realized that's the part that made everything else go around. And it took me writing 250 pages, you know, over 100K words I edited down, to go back and say, yeah, it was this moment here that broke me. And then the leg fracture a year later should have broken me, but it built me. And that's when I was able to put it all together. So I have a final...
Well, you did.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say one thing as I'm listening to you, that in a way, we're all cripples.
Mm-hmm.
You were literally one, you know?
Right.
But if I'm just thinking of some of the people in my life that I know, right? And myself. And everybody, one way or another, is wounded in some,
100%.
whatever it is, and they all have had to, that wound kind of defines them in a way, you know, how they deal with it. So I think that's why your story is sort of an archetypal story. You know, it's so, you know, literally, you had to, literally your bones were breaking, you know?
Yeah.
It's not just emotionally. Anyway, that was just all I wanted to say.
No, I appreciate that. Coming from you, it's a compliment because you're a brilliant mind and be able to think about things in the 360 that, you're right, we're all crippled in some way. And it's a matter of how we choose to address that and get better. And I think a lot of us spend more time wallowing than when it's like, shit happens, you just got to keep going forward. And there's not a lot of that. My final question to you is this. Next month's your birthday. Big 80, right?
Yeah.
What have you done to stay so mentally sharp, so physically sharp, and so emotionally sound at your age? Like,
well, you're very,
I'm being honest. Like, I sit there and I've known you for a while now, and I'm just like, damn, I hope I'm like that when I'm his age. I'll probably be like running around nursing home throwing canes at people and stuff.
Well, a friend, I actually said this on a Rich Rolls podcast, but it comes from a friend of mine named Phil Slott, who died a while ago. And he said that people will tell you that life is short, but in fact, life is long.
I agree with that.
And he said, if you're let's say you're 42 years old or whatever it is,
Yep.
you should have another 50 years ahead of you, you know? And so what his point, my friend Phil's point was, mentally you should sort of prepare yourself that you could have 3 more careers, you know? And you also have to, reinvent yourself. Life is long, so gear up for it, you know, and be thinking, if you can, what do I want to be doing at the end of this? And so that's sort of what. Although I will say another thing, my trainer T.R. Goodman, who you're going to meet tomorrow, when I first went in and started working with him, I was coming out of a bad relationship, where my thought was, I think I was about 70, I was 69 or 70, and I felt like I'm going downhill. The only thing that's coming next is the grave. You know, I'm going, whatever, I'm gonna get sick, things are gonna start to go wrong, I'm gonna lose, you know, my hearing, blah, 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 blah. And TR just sort of totally turned that around, and he said, bullshit. He said, your best years can be ahead of you, and his kind of mantra is, you know, you're getting younger, we're getting younger, we're getting younger. And so that really turned it around for me, where I felt like, fuck, I can be stronger next year than I was this year. And if I can do that, why can't I then be stronger? You know, so that sort of gave me more of a positive attitude. But I'm certainly trying to think that I'm not what 80 is supposed to be, and there's no reason why it shouldn't continue like that. So I may drop dead tomorrow, but and the other thing I think that's I'm giving you a real long answer.
No, I love it because it's wisdom, it's insight.
Being a writer is a really good thing in that way, because like I say, I'm a servant of the muse, and when the goddess gives me another idea for a book, I'm going to do it. So if I look down the road, I hope there's a bunch of ideas that are coming, you know, and that keeps you going, keeps you optimistic, keeps you challenged, and I hope I don't stop. I hope they take me out of here feet first. I'm not gonna retire or knock off or anything like that.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine retiring. When people talk about that, I'm like, after a week of that, I'd be bored. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I'd be donating my time picking up litter on the interstate or something. I'm going to turn it to you to ask the final question. If you got anything you want, feel free to hit me. I don't care where it goes. Ask whatever.
This will take us in a whole other direction.
Sure.
Explain to me, okay, back in the 60s,
Okay.
I did a little bit of acid and a little bit of mescaline. enough to know what it was,
Right.
and to know that it scared the shit out of me. But I certainly never thought this is a cure for anything. So tell me a little bit about how psychedelics, give me the nitty gritty of how that has turned things around for you.
So what I've rationalized and kind of like put together was I started with microdosing because I was scared shitless of the stuff. You know, I was I read Stephen Kotler's book, Stealing Fire, where they were giving microdosing, it was Google engineers maybe, and they were solving problems they couldn't solve. And for me, my shit was a problem I couldn't solve. So the theory behind doing these drugs is it's the ego dissolving, right? I had a giant ego for pain. Pain was my ego. And it slowly allowed that to erode so I could feel again. So I could feel myself again. So I could feel that I didn't have to have this exoskeleton around myself of this
That's a great word.
brittle to unbreakable guy, that this is just Jeff, you know? And
great answer.
It allowed me to start sorting through things. So I liken in the book, if you were to take your filing cabinet there and throw it out and all the files go everywhere, that was my mind. And all it did was help me organize those files back in a proper order that I could understand and go, that's the way out. I've done all of them in massive trips, and I've done them in the microdosing. Whenever I did massive trip, it would usually center in on something that was in my childhood, around a traumatic piece, and I could watch it from the outside, and I could see what was going on, and I could break down what was happening. Every trip I've ever had, there was only maybe 2 of the lots that I've done that were very abstract, like different stuff. All my stuff kept taking me back to my trauma. And I think I wanted to go there. I think like, you know how you talk about the muse, which is a real thing. Like, to me, it's like, I can't stop bodybuilding, just like you can't stop writing. It was one of those things where I was able to say, okay, these things are part of me. These things were the things that fueled me, and it's okay to be who I am. And they gave me that peace to myself, because I've been through my whole life, people being like, you think about things wrong, you look at things wrong, you approach life wrong. Yeah, you have this great life, but your mental space is wrong. And they kind of helped shore me up to say, no, this is who I needed to be to do this journey, this specific journey. And they put me at peace for that. And that was something that they gave me.
And this was over how long a period of time?
So 2017, I haven't used any this year, just because I wanted to go through that prep totally in my own brain up till last year. And I think they're great therapies, but my concern has become how people are going to use them. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that that's going to bring about a whole nother discussion. But for me, I looked at it like I was playing with Pandora's box. And I wanted to make sure with what I played with, was it going to harm me? And I was going into it going, well, I'm already a little broken. I'm already a little fucked up. Could I put these pieces back together? And when you take antidepressants and the other stuff they've been giving me, you don't want to feel, you don't want to live. I'd already experienced enough of that in my life, Steven. I didn't relate. I mean, there were times I could look in the mirror and I didn't even know who I was, because I must march on, I must soldier on, I must do. And they allowed me to go, you know, Jeff, it's cool. You can take a load off. You can understand that this was just part of what you needed to do to get where you wanted to go to.
Hey, let me shake your hand on that note, man. Jeff, it's great hanging out with you.
Dude,
I hope that our conversation is, you know, it's been fun for us. I hope it's of value to anybody that saw it. But
I'm sure it will.
Great to have you out here. And then we'll go to eat.
Yes, I got to say something to wrap this up. When do we eat? Yeah, when do we eat? I got to say something to wrap this up. You know, you have guys, men, women who idolize different stuff. And what about you, not necessarily idolize, but what you did is you gave me a character and the principles that I needed to understand, to follow, to be able to do this project. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me your time. Because I know your time is spent in there hammering shit out like you should. And you took, 30 minutes every month to meet with me, to go over stuff and keep me accountable. And because of you, I'm able to bring a part of my whole life to people, to judge as they see fit. But I walk away from it a better man and a more complete person because of your influence. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, you're welcome. And like I said, I knew you were going to be the one that would do it, you know?
Well, I appreciate that.
Not that there aren't, but One thing I will say, Jeff, that I sort of said to myself when I was kind of embarked on this little mentorship thing with you was, and this is true for anybody that I might help, I said, I'm never going to criticize Jeff. I'm never going to say anything negative. The only thing I'm going to say is positive reinforcement, because that's all that counted.
Correct. All
that you really needed from me was, keep going. You're doing great. God damn it, you know.
Yep.
And it worked. And each time we would meet, and you had done another 30,000 words, I would go, wow, this dude has really grabbed a bit between his teeth.
Yep.
And, you know, God bless him. And I thought, you know, it's so great. Rather than, it could have gone a lot of other ways, you know, but it didn't. So God bless you.
When you agreed to mentor me,
you are the man.
I appreciate that. When you agreed to mentor me, it wasn't a promise not to let you down. It was a promise not to let myself down. And you held me. You held me accountable to that promise to myself by being there and being like, "You got this. Just keep shoving, and I did. So I thank you for that.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Great.
Awesome, man.
Let's go eat.
Let's go eat.
All right.